Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar dedicated to automation with Hiptest. I'm Vincent. I'm one of the developers here at Hiptest and one of the contributors of Hiptest Publisher, which is the tool we are going to see during this demo. So a quick word about the agenda. Most of it will be a demo, but just before, I'm going to introduce Hiptest and the reason why we build the tool and the process we use in testing here. It's just going to be 2 or 3 slides, and most of the webinar will be a demo, so in which I'm going to show you how you can start the automation process. So we did the bootstrap part. You've got some scenarios, you want to automate them. How do you do that? Then we'll go to the scale part. So how do you handle newly created scenarios, new feature, new things to automate? And at the end, I'm going to show how you can integrate Hiptest with any CI tool. So once your tests are automated, we'll end up with a few key takeaways. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. About the Q&A session, you can already ask your question right now using the questions panel in GoToWebinar. One thing to note, I will not be able to answer them during the webinar, so you'll have to wait for the end of the session for me to answer. Another thing, this webinar is recorded, so you will receive an email by tomorrow with the recording, and you can share that with colleagues or anyone who would be interested in the automation process with Hiptest. So a quick word about Hiptest and why we created this tool. So a few years ago, we were thinking we lacked a testing platform that was really designed for the Agile and DevOps teams, and we wanted a platform that was able to handle the test-first approaches, such as BDD, which we are a big fan of, but also ATDD and other kind of approaches. We also wanted a test automation tool that was able to scale. So not something like you start the automation, everything works fine, and after a while, it's a real pain to maintain. So one thing we really had in mind was the possibility to easily maintain the project as such as the automation code that's generated. And last but not least, we wanted a tool where everyone was able to collaborate. So not only a tool for the QA teams, we wanted a tool where the QA, the developers, product owner, anyone involved in the company and in the product that is developed were able to collaborate. And that's tied to the BDD methodology. I'll just give a quick word about that. And that's also something we strongly believe in Hiptest. So just to give an idea of how we work here at Hiptest, we use Trello as our backlog manager. So we store all our backlog there and the stories, defining the different features we want to add to the tool. So it's in Trello. And by the way, our Trello board is public, so you can access it directly from the application. I can show that to you later on if you're interested in that. Then when we say, okay, this feature is going to be released in the next sprint, or at least we'll start working on it in the next sprint, we'll have a free Amigo session. So once again, it's BDD process where we will refine this story with multiple examples. So following the Gherkin syntax, and we do that in Hiptest. When this is ready and all the team is aligned on what is the feature and what needs to be done, the dev team will kick in and start implementing the story, and alongside they will implement the different tests that were written in Hiptest. Once this is done, this is all committed, pushed to Git, and shippable, which is our CI tool, will execute the test, push the results back to Hiptest, as we'll see during the demo. And if all the tests pass, it's going to deploy that in production, where we may complete the result of the test with some exploratory testing. One thing to note here at Hiptest, this, not full cycle, but at least the last 3 steps, and especially 4 and 5, it happens between 5 to 10 times a day. So we are strong believer in DevOps and continuous deployment. But now enough talk about Hiptest, and let's see how easily it can get to automate your scenario and scale them. So for this demo, I'm using a coffee machine example. It's one of the samples you can generate in Hiptest directly from this menu. So it's not a classical filter coffee machine. It's more an automated espresso coffee machine. So I don't know if you've got this kind of machine at work or at home. So it takes raw beans, takes water, obviously, and it makes really wonderful coffee, but half of the time it's going to complain because it's missing water, it's missing beans, you need to descale it. If you've got this kind of machine, you know what I'm talking about. And interesting, this project is pretty interesting because although it looks like a pretty simple thing, just a coffee machine, it can generate multiple different examples. And another reason why I chose this example for this webinar is that it's tied to two tutorials that we propose on the Hiptest. And one that is really interesting, if you're interested in automation, is the CI in 5 minutes flat tutorial. Because this coffee machine, you can generate the project in Hiptest. But if you go to our GitHub repository, or at least our GitHub page, that would be better if I open the correct one. This coffee machine has been automated with the test for all the languages we support in Hiptest. So Python, Java, JavaScript, PHP, and so on. So you'll be able to try this coffee machine with a real example. Well, real doesn't make real coffee, sadly. But yeah, you'll be able to play with this example with the language you prefer and integrate that with a CI tool like Travis CI, for example. So let's have a look to the project itself. You will see that it's organized, so following the BDD methodology. So we got different features like serving coffee, and we got simple multiple scenarios inside. Like here, you can see the most simple case. So you start a coffee machine, you take a coffee, and you get a coffee, which is not happening that often, once again, if you have this kind of coffee machine. But what's really interesting here, you will see that this example, and it's the case for all the other ones, are written using the Gherkin syntax. And this is not something that's mandatory when you want to automate your test. At Hiptest, as I said, we are strong believers in in the BDD methodology. That's something we advise people to use because we think it can really help making better software. But if you want to use Hiptest but not BDD and still automate your test, that's not something that is mandatory. In fact, when you want to automate your scenarios, there is only one prerequisite, and that's the use of action words. So just to show you, when this project, for example, has a setting that is enabled, you can go to the project setting and say, I want to get my project ready for automation. So I'm just going to disable it 1 second to show what I mean with action words only. So when you start writing your scenario, so coffee should be served and it should be good. That's the least we expect from this kind of coffee machine. Here you will see that when you create new steps, you've got basically 3 choices: create an action word, or create an action, or a result. Action and results are steps that can be really helpful when you want to do manual testing, more classical testing with action, result scenarios, but there will be a real pain when it comes to automation. So when you want to have a scenario ready for automation, the only thing that is a prerequisite is that all the steps are action word and action words only. And to ensure this, what you can do, so reverting back this setting of the project, is activate the automation ready mode, which is also called BDD mode, but don't worry, you don't have to do BDD. And then when you'll start typing a step, so it should be good, you will be sure that your scenarios only contain action word. And once again, that's the only prerequisite. Your scenario should be written with action word. And to be frank, there's a second one, but it's almost the same. The setup of the scenarios. So for those of you who are not familiar with setup, it's a list of steps that is executed before each scenario in the folder. Same principle, the setup has to be action word. And basically, you're ready for automation as soon as you've removed all the action results from the scenarios you want to automate. And that's it. At the Hiptest level, at least when you handle your project, that's the only thing you need to remember. Use action word, and that's it. So you may not want to follow BDD, you may want to organize your scenarios the way you want. That's not a problem for the automation as long as you use action word. So here in this project, which is using only action words, we got a few scenarios. So if I recall correctly, we got 14 different scenarios. And let's say we want to start the automation. We've defined the scenarios and maybe the code has been started to be implemented and we want to have them automated. So this is really the bootstrap phase. Some scenarios in Hiptest and we want to automate them. And that can be done pretty easily by going to the automation tab in Hiptest. And here, what you will see is Hiptest Publisher as a service. So Hiptest Publisher is an open source tool, which role is to translate your scenarios, your folder, your action words from Hiptest to executable code in any of the language or framework you can see there. And what you see here is the web version of Hiptest Publisher, so directly accessible from inside the application. But we'll see later on that there is also a command line version for the tool, which has a bit more power that will help you tweak the code you generate and so on. But we'll see that just a bit later on. So for this project and for this webinar, I'm going to use Ruby RSpec as the automation framework. The reason behind it is that it's my favorite test framework, so I prefer to use it. But just for you to know, even if you don't know Ruby or RSpec, just remember that what I'm going to show you works exactly the same way if you are using Cucumber Ruby, if you are using C# and YUnit, any of the tool that we currently support, you can follow the principle I'm going to show you exactly the same way. So don't worry if you don't know Ruby, that's not going to be an issue. So let's have a look to the zip file we downloaded by clicking there. If I can open it, that's better. So we get 4 files inside. First one is a config file for Hiptest Publisher. As I told you, Hiptest Publisher is also available as a command line tool. So here, you already have the config file pointing to the correct project with the correct language, framework, and so on. The second file, I'm going to skip it for now, but don't worry, we'll get back to it. And the third one is the list of tests. So by default, we generate all the tests in one single file. Of course, we have the possibility to keep the same hierarchy that we have in Hiptest to the generated code. Don't worry, that's just an option to trigger. We generate all the tests in one single file for one pretty simple reason. It's to ensure that it works out of the box in most cases, but that's the only reason. And here, if you're a bit familiar with coding, what you may notice is that those tests, like it is possible to take 10 coffees after the message fill water tank is displayed, for example, the code inside is just called to different functions. And these functions are defined in the last file you downloaded, which is the action word file. So the action words, so the one you use when writing your different scenarios, each action word will become one function. And that's where the automation team will kick in and fill in the blanks and implementing each of those functions. So they can use basically whatever they want at the automation level. For example, you can use Selenium to test a website. You can use Appium to test a mobile app. You can use HTTP commands to test an API. You can link that to external tools such as cross-browser testing to run the test in the cloud. That's completely up to you and the way you want to automate your test. Just one thing to remember, of course, you need to keep the same name for the functions, otherwise the test won't work anymore. Same principle, we generate the action words file as one single file, but you have the possibility, depending on the language you use for automation, to split that in multiple different files. For example, at Hiptest, our action words are split between 10 to 15 different files, if I recall correctly, depending on the way we will automate the action word and where it will impact the application. Another thing to note, this action word file is the only place where you will write code. So basically, this file, the list of tests, must be considered as an auto-generated file. You should never modify it manually. You'll understand a bit later on when I'm going to show you how it works with the CI, but you don't have any reason to modify this file. And if you want to modify the way it looks, or maybe you want to do more includes or change a bit the code, it's possible to do it. Hiptest Publisher allows you to override the templates used to generate the code. That's not an issue, but you don't have any reason to modify this manually. And if you start doing so, you will lose one of the most interesting parts of automation with Hiptest, which is the reusability of action words. So now you may think, okay, those action words is nice. I want to automate them, but the problem I have is that I don't have enough resources or enough time to automate all of them. And that's something that's understandable, and we've heard that with different of our users. What I'm going to show you next is a video. It was made by our colleagues at TestComplete, and what they are going to show is how you can use record and replay tools such as TestComplete to automate the different steps that are written in Hiptest, so the different action words. So using record and replay capabilities. So it's a video that should last, if I recall correctly, 2.5 minutes, no, 3.5 minutes. And I come back to you just after those 4 minutes.
Today, we're going to look at how you can translate Hiptest scenarios into automation tests using TestComplete. A quick introduction about the products. Hiptest is a continuous testing platform for agile test management and behavior-driven development. And TestComplete is a UI testing tool for manual testers and automation engineers to quickly create powerful and reusable automated tests for desktop, web, or mobile applications. For this example, let's look at a web-based orders application in which you can add and delete orders. In Hiptest, we've created 3 simple Gherkin scenarios. Let's look at one of these. Given I have launched the orders application and I have logged in using a username and password, when I add a new order to the list, then I must see that order added when I return to the list. To automate these test steps, we'll use TestComplete's record, playback, and scripting capabilities. Let's launch TestComplete, create a new Hiptest project from the File menu, log into Hiptest, connect our project in Hiptest, and in a couple of seconds, TestComplete has imported all scenarios from our Hiptest project into the TestComplete IDE. For each step, there is a corresponding routine ready for automation. For now, these are just placeholder functions that are not implemented yet. Using TestComplete, you can simulate user actions by either creating test scripts manually or recording user workflows. Right-click and select Record this routine. TestComplete is now in record mode. Launch IE and open the orders application page. When you hit the stop button, notice that the launch application script has been generated. Similarly, let's record actions for the second routine. On the login page of the orders application, enter the username and password. The username in this case is tester, password is test. Click on the login button and stop the recording. Wait for a few seconds until TestComplete processes the actions. And there you have it, all the steps recorded as we perform them. For the sake of time, we'll skip recording other steps and use the script we've already prepared. We are now ready to run our tests. As you can see, TestComplete is executing each step and simulating all recorded actions. Anyone from manual testers to seasoned developers can create these tests. Remember, you can also trigger these tests from a CI tool such as Jenkins or TFS. Once the test run is completed, TestComplete generates a neat log of all your test results. The test run is also updated in Hiptest, as you can see in the test run section. And there you have it. We've successfully showcased a BDD workflow from creation of scenarios in Hiptest to UI automation in TestComplete.
So yeah, as you can see, using record and replay tool can be pretty easy, especially with TestComplete when it comes to automate the action words. For this webinar, I'm not going to use record and replay, especially as I told before, this coffee machine example is already automated in all the languages we support with Hiptest Publisher. So I'm not also going to automate all the action words one by one. That's not going to be really interesting for you, and it's already done. So let's have a look to the action words automated. This is a pretty simple example. So we are basically using the API of the coffee machine to automate each of the action words. So here we've got all our action words automated one by one. And if we decide to run the test, so like this, we should see our 15 examples that have been run and executed in an automated way. You may wonder why 15 examples have been executed while there is only 14 scenarios. The reason is this particular scenario, which is using a data table in Hiptest. So that means that one scenario generated two different scenarios, so one in English and one in French. So as you can see, the bootstrap phase can be pretty easy and straightforward. You've got your scenarios written in Hiptest. You download all the code with Hiptest Publisher, the web version. You automate your action words, and your scenarios are ready to run. Normally, the next step would be, okay, I take this and I link that to a CI tool. But just before skipping to the CI part, what I want to show you is how you can handle scaling your project. So what happens when you write new scenario, new features, and you want to automate the test for that, because the process changed a little bit. So let's get back to Hiptest, and even more, we'll go to Jira and consider that we've got this new feature that needs to be automated in our coffee machine, and it basically states that the machine can be shut down. I think it should have been done at the beginning of the project, but apparently it's going to be done in this new sprint. So let's go to Hiptest and work and write a scenario that will describe this use case. So here we already have a folder describing that the machine can be turned on and off. So I'm going to create one new scenario here that says machine can be shut down. Same name as in Jira. Here, before writing anything, what I'm going to do is simply drag and drop my new scenario in the Hiptest plugin. And apparently I had one issue with the drag and drop, so I'm going to do that with the copy paste, but don't worry, it works exactly the same with drag and drop. So I'm just going to paste that here, click link, and now from my Jira issue, I've got a link to the scenario in Hiptest, and from Hiptest, I've got a link to the Jira issue. One thing to note about this integration, it's an end-to-end link. So one scenario can be linked to multiple issues in Jira, and one Jira issue can be linked to multiple scenarios or folder in Hiptest. So now let's write our scenarios, our new scenario. So I'm going to write it, let's say the BDD style, or at least using the Gherkin syntax. Once again, this is not something mandatory for automation, but once again, we are strong believers in BDD here at Hiptest, and the rest of the scenarios are written this way for the project. So yeah, don't mind if you, once again, if you don't want to use BDD, you don't have to. So we need some context. So it's going to, we are going to say, okay, we need a coffee machine that is started. And here you will see that I'm going to reuse an existing action word. And that's really interesting because as I'm reusing this action word, if you saw before, this action word was automated previously. So basically, I don't have anything to do. I'm reusing an existing and automated action word. So basically, for the automation part, at least for this step, nothing has to be done. And for the next one, which is going to be, okay, I'm going to shut down the coffee machine. Same thing, it's an existing one that I know that has been automated. So I don't have anything to do. That's one of the powerful feature of the action words. The more you use them, the less work you have to do. And as a developer, that's something that really matters. Not that developers are lazy, but if we can avoid doing the same thing all over again, we like that. So if you get your action words which are automated, do your best to reuse them. That's going to help a lot your developers. So now we've got some output. So I guess the coffee machine should be that's better, shut down. And here I don't have any proposition made by the Hiptest editor. So what I'm going to do is create an action word, not an action, not a result, especially because I don't have the choice anymore, but an action word, and that's going to help me when it comes to the automation. So I've got my scenario. It looks pretty good. It's linked with my Jira issues. So now what I would do in normal use case would be to start developing this feature and automate the test. And for the automation, I can't really get back to this automation tab because it's going to regenerate everything, including the existing action words. So that would mean I'm going to lose all the work that has been done by the automation team when in the previous sprint. And I don't want that, of course. So what I'm going to do, instead of using the web version of Hiptest Publisher, I'm going to use the command line version. First thing I'm going to do is regenerate all the tests. As I told, the test scripts are auto-generated code. So normally, no one should have made manual modification, and there should be no changes there. And once again, it should be considered as auto-generated code, so no one should make manual modifications there. So using Hiptest Publisher, using my config file, and what I'm going to say is, okay, regenerate, but only the test. Don't override the action words, and don't lose the work of the automation team. Here you may have seen a quick glitch here, and that's the new folder that is finally automated. So what is finally as scenario, and we can recognize our new scenario. So coffee machine is started, I shut it down, and it should be shut down. When I want to update the action words, I can't, once again, regenerate the action words file, but Hiptest Publisher is going to help me by giving me a summary of the changes between my code and what is on Hiptest. And if you recall, in the first time I said, okay, I'm going to talk later on this YAML file. That's where it's used. This YAML file, so which is called action word signature.yaml, which is a big, ugly YAML file. This file is the one that makes the link between your code, or at least what you've generated, and Hiptest. So what I can do now is simply, once again, use Hiptest Publisher, my config file, and say, okay, show me the action words diff. Give me a summary of the differences between my code and Hiptest. And here, without much surprise, we can see that we got a new action word that was created, and it's called the coffee machine should be shut down. If I had deleted an action word or renamed an action word or updated the definition of an action word, basically whatever you can do with action word, it would show here. And for each different use case, so deletion, modification, creation, and so on, it will provide a command line that you can simply copy paste to the terminal. And that's going to help you know what you have to do. So here, for example, I get the skeleton. I can copy it to my list of action words. And apparently, I'm unable to do a correct copy paste. That's better. And now all I have to do is to automate it. So you can see it's pretty simple. You generate the skeleton, at least for the created one, and you automate them. So this one is going to be pretty fast. So what I'm going to do is check that the coffee machine is not started. That will be equivalent to check that it's shut down. And now if I run my test again, I will see that I've got 16 examples. And this time we can see machine can be shut down is appearing as one of the green tests. So it's been executed and everything went fine. Before committing this to Git and pushing that to the CI, I have one last thing to do, and is regenerate the YAML file I was talking about to ensure that next time one of my colleagues runs the command show action words diff, he will not be told, hey, there is a new action word called the coffee machine should be shut down. So I'm going to validate that. And now if one of my colleagues says, okay, show me the action words diff, it's going to say, no, it's okay, everything is up to date, or at least no action word set. So you can see handling the scaling of your project. Once again, it's pretty simple. It needs a bit of command line, of course, but this is meant to be done by technical people who are going to write the automation code. So should not be a problem for them. It's just a few command lines to run, and it will drive you in the changes you need to do in your action words. And once again, I just shown the example of new action word created, but Hiptest Publisher can also handle modified action word like renamed, parameter added, parameter removed, and so on. And in each case, it's going to generate different command line with help on what you are supposed to do. So now normally what would happen is, once again, I commit everything, I push that to Git, and the CI kicks in and does its job. So I'm going to show you how you can easily integrate your CI tool, any CI tool, with Hiptest. The first thing you need is a test run in which you will store all the automated tests. Here it's called CI without much imagination. And one thing to note about this test run is, as I said, you only place there the scenarios that are fully automated. It doesn't make sense to have your work in progress scenarios appearing in the CI test run because they are going to fail on the CI as you can expect. Here, as I just automated one new scenario, I can say, okay, I'm going to add this machine can be shut down to my test run. And in a few seconds, you will see right now that we got one scenario that hasn't been executed yet. And once again, without much surprise, it's the one about the machine can be shut down. One other thing to note about this test run, in this test run, you should never do manual test execution. You can create as much test run as you want in Hiptest, that's not an issue. So if you want to do manual testing to complete the automation process and so on, of course you can do it. Most of our users are doing it, having both automated and manual test cases, but just don't do it in the same test run. If it's one dedicated to the CI, only the CI should push the results there. And now let's see how the CI push the results. And it's pretty simple. So if you go to the automate button here, you will see 3 command lines that you can simply copy paste to your CI job configuration. So it can be Jenkins, it can be Bamboo, it can be Travis, Shippable, Circle CI, TeamCity, you name it. It's just 3 command lines to copy paste to link this CI tool to Hiptest. So let's have a look to the 3 command lines. The first 2 ones are going to be executed before running the test. So the first one, install Hiptest Publisher, that we need for the second one. And the second one is going to regenerate all the tests based on this test run. The reason behind it is to ensure that what you execute on your CI match what you defined in Hiptest. So let's consider a sneaky developer, like I can be sometime, that decided to comment one of the tests because he said, okay, I've developed this feature, it's breaking this test, I'm just going to comment it out, and the CI is going to say everything is okay. Well, no. Hiptest Publisher is going to regenerate this specific test, override the comments, execute the test, it's going to fail, and people will see that there is a problem on the application. And that's really important to regenerate those tests before executing them. That ensures that what you run is what you defined in Hiptest. And the last command line, you can see here, will push the results back to Hiptest. So obviously that's executed after you have executed your test. And to push the results, we currently support those 7 different test formats, test report formats. So basically, JUnit and TAP will cover 90% of the test framework existing. We also, since a few weeks, support JSON outputted by Cucumber. One of the big advantages of this format is that it's going to show which step have failed in your scenario. And we also support more specific one like Android Studio or Robot Framework or NUnit, which are really dedicated to a specific test execution framework. So normally, as I said, the CI would execute the test. Here, what I'm going to do is play the role of the CI and run the different command lines. The reason behind that is that for this project, we use Travis CI, which is a really great CI tool, especially for open source project. One drawback is it can take 5 to 10 minutes to kick in, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep you entertained for those 5 minutes waiting for it to kick in. So what I'm going to do is take my Travis YAML file, which is the config file for Travis, and I'm going to copy paste the command line in my terminal. Once again, in real life use case, you don't have to do this copy paste every time. You just let the CI play its role. First thing, we regenerate the test script based on the test run. And you may see or may notice here minus only test. It's just to ensure we don't regenerate the action words, which would not be the best thing to do. Then we can execute our test. This time we won't have any output because we are generating a JUnit report file. And then we can push the results back to Hiptest. It's going to tell us 15 tests imported. If we get back to Hiptest, everything is green and everything is awesome. So here you can see now that how easy it is to link your CI tool with Hiptest. Just 3 command lines to copy and paste to the config file or the config file of your CI job, and that's it. Pull the result, pull the test, run them, push the results back, and that's it. Simple as that. And here we can see now in the execution history that we got a slight bump here because we got one extra test that was added to the specific test run. So now we've covered all the process when it comes to automation with Hiptest. Bootstrap phase, so you generate your code with Hiptest Publisher as a service, you start automating the scenario. The scaling phase, how do you handle new action words or modified action word, and integration with a CI tool. Just to remember briefly the process, whatever you're in the bootstrap phase or the scale phase, it's more or less always the same. So you create one or multiple new scenarios that you want to automate. You pull the code either in the web version or with the command line version. You implement the newly created action word. Once this is done, you regenerate the signature file. You commit that. You add your scenario to your CI dedicated test run, and then you just let the CI do its job, run the test, push the results back. And now a few key takeaways from this webinar. The first one, you may have noticed that the scenarios for this specific project are not plain classical scenario. And once again, we follow and we are strong believers in the BDD methodology. And okay, it's not linked to the automation, but you can do way more with your test than simply checking that your application works. And you can tell a story with your test. You can have everyone aligned on what the application should do simply by writing example that anyone can understand and not only the technical people. And yeah, once again, we are strong believers in BDD, and you should give it a try just to see how helpful it can be to have everyone understand what the product does, what the feature does, and have everyone aligned on the business value of a given feature. Second point, you should spend time on refactoring your test. As I've shown, if you get an action word that is automated, you only have to automate it once. And once it's done, you don't have to do anything more when you are reusing your scenario. So you should spend time, as developers spend time refactoring the code to avoid duplication. you should do the same at your project level. If you start having 2, 3, maybe action word having the same meaning, doing the same thing, there is an issue. If you get this, that means that you are going to have to duplicate the code for the automation, and you lose all the interest that comes with the action word, which is the reusability and is the work of the automation. So yeah, spend some time, maybe not every day, of course, but if you spend regular time on checking that everything is fine, you don't have duplication and so on, it's going to help you in 1 or 2 years when you want to refactor your project and it became a big mess. It's way easier to spend a bit of time every day, every week, cleaning up the project instead of trying to do it once a year or once every 2 years and facing a huge mess that can't be maintained anymore. And last but not least, yeah, as soon as you've got some automated tests, you should link them with a CI tool. As a developer, the CI tool is one of the huge game changer I saw in my life. It's just so different working with and or without a CI. You got this quick feedback loop. You avoid so much issues with classical example, but one file that you forgot to commit and so on. And it just ensures that, yeah, what you develop doesn't break anything. No one forgets anymore to run the test and so on. So yeah, if you got any test that is automated, just spend a bit of time to integrate that with the CI tool, and it's going to help you and the developers in a huge way. So I think it's time for the question now. So if you have any, you can fire them at will using the question panel in GoToWebinar. And one thing while waiting for the questions, I was talking about the Trello board. You can directly access it through Hiptest using this link, so Hiptest roadmap. And here you can see what we are working on, what we've released for the current quarter, what we are planning to do after this is done, and what are the different tasks we plan to add. Another thing, so if you got a Trello account, and you see one feature and you think, oh, I need this thing in a Hiptest, don't hesitate to upvote the different feature that really drives us to know what do people want, what do people need in Hiptest to ease their work. So apparently there is no question. At the end of this webinar, so just after we finish, we have a few questions for you. So it's just going to take a couple of seconds. And if you have any feedback on this webinar, good or bad, just if you can just spend a few seconds to give us this feedback, that will really be helpful for us and for the next coming webinar. So and in the meanwhile, we get a question. Just to finish on that, yeah, if you have any feedback, it's really going to be helpful a lot for that, for us to make the webinars better. So if you expected things that you didn't see in the webinar, if you were expecting more detail on this or on anything, just give us this feedback, and thanks in advance for it. So we got one question. So I'm new to QA and my company has tasked me with automation on many things. What sort of learning curve is associated with Hiptest, and how long would it take to integrate generally? That's a good question. The learning curve in Hiptest is pretty quick. So I don't know what is your role exactly. Generally, it takes it's pretty quick to handle, yeah, creating new scenarios and refactoring them or having the different features. So once again, we've got different tutorials to help you, lots of documentation. And one really helpful thing is this button that you can see here, which is the support button. And yeah, it's you get access to the support team that can help you in your learning curve. But yeah, if you're more talking about the automation, that will deepen. So I don't know what's your background, if you're a developer or not. To be frank, the automation, if you use record and replay tool to automate each action word, it can be pretty quick. Hiptest Publisher, the command line is pretty simple. I know some people have difficulties with command line, but basically you got 3 commands to do, so it's pretty simple to do that. But that said, if you need to automate and you don't have that much developer background, it's not something you can learn in a few days, of course. But so that will mainly depend on yeah, your background and where you are supposed to do things. So yeah, maybe we can also discuss that. So in Hiptest, if you can click the support button, and we're going to help you in this learning curve. But yeah, basically learning how to use Hiptest, it's about a day to get most of the features of Hiptest understood. So no more questions apparently. Yes, there's another one. So hello, I'm looking from Matthew. I'm looking to automate some external tool with Hiptest. However, in order to do so, I need to import packages that aren't available inside of Python. Is this possible to upload to Hiptest server? No, the automation code, we don't handle that in Hiptest scenarios. The automation code lives alongside the code of the tested application. So some of our users were wondering, like, hey, there is a definition in there is a definition for the different action words. Can I do the automation there? And the answer is no. Hiptest is there to describe the scenarios. You can do many things with the action word, but the automation code should always live alongside the code of the application. And most of the time, it's the developers who are going to automate the test. And for example, it's way easier if you decide, I don't know, to change a button in the application. It's way easier to change the glue, the automation code alongside in the same commit than having to go to an external tool, integrate there, and so on. And in your case, if you need to import some libraries in your code and that's not generated by default, for example, by Hiptest Publisher, what you can do is customize the templates you use for the generated code to generate the code to import those templates. I hope this answers your question. And yeah, if that doesn't answer, maybe you can also use the chat button, and we can have a talk using the support tool that may be easier to give some example and so on. So apparently we don't have any more questions. So thanks for your time. Thanks for assisting this webinar. Once again, if you can give feedback at the end with the few questions you'll get at the end of the webinar, that's going to be really helpful for us. So thanks for your time. See you on Hiptest. Bye-bye.